Hi, and welcome to NCTV's series on homelessness and where do we go from here. I'm your host for this segment. My name is Al Dover. I'm a retired Superior Court judge from Nevada County. And my guest today is Ariel Lovett, who is with CORE. Thank you for being here, Ariel.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So Ariel, I wanted just to start out so that the folks know something about who you are, and then I'll ask you about who you are in relationship to what you do. But could you just start telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and I think that it actually really relates to what we're talking about today. So I'm a long-term Nevada County resident. I went to high school here and then left for a lot of years and came back wanting to raise my family here and honestly doing a pretty major career switch, wanting to move into social services. So I worked in family resource centers, did a lot of work with the child welfare system with Nevada County for 6 years, did some work for public health, for schools, for various nonprofits, served on the board of directors for the food bank, actually, and now Sierra Harvest and YMCA. So, really looking at how I can make a difference, and that's actually what led me to work with community recovery resources, which is why I'm here today. But when we think about, or when I think about how I can do the most good, what I learned working over those, whatever that was, decade in sort of social and public services was this really challenging common denominator with substance use disorder. And so thinking about when investors think about return on investment and where that lever is, and for me it was like how return on mission, how can I really start to move that needle, which is actually kind of audacious even to think you can move the needle, but how can I have the greatest good, and really looking at this challenge that substance use disorder has and the role that substance use disorder plays in a primary factor in so many of our most pressing social challenges, whether it's homelessness that we're talking about today, child welfare, public safety, public health, and so seeing that's how I could give back to this community. So it's been about 9 years actually that I've been at CORE, and we've really done a lot in that time to really look at how we can be more effective, meaning how really are we supporting individuals, families in our community back to health and wellness?
Thank you for that. And some people here, maybe many in the community, believe it or not, won't know what CORE is, or what it does, or what those CORR stands for.
Yeah.
So would you enlighten?
Yes, and so clearly not marketing geniuses, but we're going to work on that.
Okay.
But so Community Recovery Resource actually started back in the 70s with a group of volunteers. A judge was actually part of that early on, but really started so then 40 plus years ago as one of the first DUI pilot programs in the state, and then grew over the years to better meet the needs of the community. And then in the last 10 years, like I said before, really has had this major shift in how we can be effective in treating substance use disorder. So what we have done is develop really a continuum of services and supports, recognizing that a cookie cutter approach to addressing this really challenging chronic disease is really ineffective. And I think that's given sort of treatment maybe a bad rap, and maybe deservedly so, right, in the past and across the country. Like, well, does it actually work? Well, it works if it absolutely works, but it works a lot better if it is delivered in an effective and comprehensive way. So what that has looked like for CORE is really, and you were part of that, a huge help in that, but is developing what we now have as the campus model, which is really an integrated continuum of care. And what I mean by that is really being able to meet people where they are in illness or wellness. So being able to offer everything from prevention services. One thing I always want to share is that 90% of people with substance use disorder began their use as children or teenagers. So 9 out of 10 people that are now suffering from this chronic disease that is our nation's most costly. It costs more than cancer and diabetes combined.
Wow.
And like we said, we know it has all these incredibly challenging ramifications for individuals, families, and communities. But so 90% beginning their use as children and teens. So what are we doing there on that prevention side? And I think that's a really important topic that needs to be in the forefront of all of our minds as community leaders and parents and educators and just every community member, really looking at how are we protecting our young people from trauma and from substance use disorders. So meaning, how are we reducing access and how are we building those protective factors? But anyway, so having this continuum of care from prevention through early intervention programs, outpatient treatment, and then residential treatment. So we now have 87 beds of residential treatment.
So CORE, you mentioned a campus, and that's here. I mean, that's in this community.
Yeah. We were able to build, with the help of this community, truly in so many different ways, from from the logistical elements that it takes to build a project with amazing local contractors, project managers, with donors that helped make that possible. We were able to build this really flagship campus that is actually a model for addressing substance use disorders in an effective and integrated way. So by integrated, having an outpatient center that has mental health and drug testing and outpatient treatment and primary care integrated into that, so people can actually access their primary care while they're, which makes sense, right? So we've had these systems that kind of parse out people, like you go for your mental health here and your substance use disorder treatment here, but no, we can't address your primary care. And really, we are one holistic being. But so having that outpatient center on the same campus as residential treatment, we're one of the few places where women can come into treatment with their small children. So we have child development centers, which are amazing. And then also transitional supportive housing, which is, again, coming back to why we're here today, but is a very relevant piece, although all of it really is, if we're looking at how to effectively address homelessness, ideally would be to prevent it, and then to, but also if people are experiencing that. So we have on the campus, somewhere around 30 plus beds of transitional supportive housing where folks can live for up to 6 months while they are stabilizing. So
now, just to let me interrupt you for a second. So now, we're really talking now about the intersection of what CORE does and homelessness. I mean, we've been talking about it, I know in some way, but this really is kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of some of this transitional housing, for example.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think absolutely. Really, I don't think we can have a conversation about homelessness without having a conversation about substance use disorder and effectively treating it. Again, when we look at these related either causal or corollary factors, there's a huge relationship between substance use disorder and homelessness. So when we're looking at how we want to be effective in addressing those and preventing or ending, we need to look at them together. So, I really see everything that CORE does as in some way addressing homelessness, because if we can prevent it, if we can stabilize people, and that's really, I think, fundamentally what it comes down to, is stabilizing individuals and families. And that sounds simple, but there are so many aspects that go into that. But certainly stabilizing a substance use disorder is key to people being able to function in all the ways that we need to attain and sustain housing. So what CORE, specifically what that looks like is often, a trajectory might often look for someone like coming out of homelessness or very unsafe living environments that would soon result in homelessness, or they are homeless, and then coming out of those into residential treatment and maybe withdrawal management, which is formerly known as detox. But that first step of being supported to, as during that withdrawal period, then moving into residential treatment, which is highly structured and highly supportive, 24/7, staffed by counselors, by therapists. We have in some of our sites RNs on staff. So really providing this very intensive support and doing, so much skill building and retraining and stabilizing during that period of intensive support. And then, I think that this was another place that people would fall through the cracks, is then saying like, hey, good job, you did this, you did 30 days, you're kind of stabilized, you're healthy, you have these new skills and tools, ways to communicate, ways to do, positive self-care, everything from nutrition to sleep hygiene, and now go forth, right? And there's maybe no job, something on a criminal record, no transportation, no driver's license, and it's like, oh, they weren't successful. So building that next step, which is transitional supportive housing, kind of what got us to this question, is we have somewhere around 80 beds now of transitional supportive housing throughout Nevada and Placer counties. 50 plus of those are in Nevada County, many of them at the campus, and then we have some in Grass Valley, and also a really beautiful home for women and children in Truckee. And that is designed for people to really continue that stabilization in a way that they're positively engaging back into the community and thinking, when we think about those social determinants of health, so helping people take those steps toward employment, which often takes a lot of unraveling to get to employment, to housing, to transportation, making sure they're connected with a primary care, and then making sure that if there are children in the family, that they're also appropriately, that their development is appropriately supported. Again, whether that's school or preschool or any other special services and primary care. Mm-hmm. So then we have this continuum where someone might stay within our programs for over a year, where they're moving through this process of achieving stabilization. Which again, I think is fundamentally what is needed, is all these pieces to stabilize. And that's why when we think about drug treatment, I think folks think that it's maybe this older model, or a model that is done elsewhere, which is maybe a 30-day program and you're good to go, or you're going to go to 3 months of outpatient classes and talk about how you feel. But really it's so much more than that. And then people, we do have a lot of success with people transitioning from transitional housing to employment. We have a great relationships with a lot of local employers, and to housing, and that can be very challenging, that we can do all this stabilization. And when I say we, so CORE does a lot of this, but it's in partnership with so many other organizations and with our public systems as well, partnering with Child Protective Services, with behavioral health, with drug courts, and also other private nonprofits that are able to support certain elements of that family stability. And then needing that next step along the way for folks, which is affordable housing. And that we have some success with that, absolutely. People meet people in treatment, they're able to, and that's a big part of it too, is having those social supports, positive social supports, and then attaining some sort of either subsidized or affordable housing. But there's also a lot of challenge with that, because if it's not there, where do they go on their next step? Really?
And where do they go on their next step? I mean, this is a huge fall off.
It can be, and we were talking about that in the lobby here, that visualizing, how our community systems are supporting people along a path, and thinking about, like, if you had these stones set up in the lake and you need to be able to step to the next one, and sometimes we have these gaps where we're then expecting someone to take this giant leap and then they fall in the water and you're like, well, that didn't work. But, and it is, then we have created a situation where that person and family can be re-traumatized, right? And really experience challenge. And we've also created a challenge for the community in terms of that investment in all these stones then being, not leveraged to that next step. So where do they go? We work really hard to help people, folks that are in our systems will work really hard to try to connect them with supportive housing. And ideally, we work with the apartments. We have a couple brokers who are willing to work with us, because sometimes looking at someone on paper, you're like, oh wow, she's got something on her record, her credit is not great, it's going up, but it's pretty bad. Yeah. And then they might just get screened out at the gate. So being able to have relationships with people and then help place folks. But I think we one thing that we would like to do in terms of our next step, and I'm probably
Yeah.
jumping ahead, but is develop long-term family housing. So it is maybe up to 2 years where people can stay longer and really achieve that stability to then be part of the housing market, which is challenging for everybody. So I don't know, I'm not going to be able to solve all of that.
No, but I think you've done a remarkable job, and CORE has done a remarkable job. And thank you for explaining so much of what CORE has done to provide stabilization on such a fabulous level. I know I referred to it once laughingly as Betty Ford for everybody, because you don't have to have $50,000 to be at CORE,
Right.
you know, and they'll kind of meet you where you are, and the service is so phenomenal. So it's great that people have learned so much about it. So I want to thank you for that, Ariel.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
And
you
I
for
think
being here. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you bring up a good point, which is that that the campus embodies to the level that we do, but is really something we need on a system level too, which is why I think, you know, in some ways the campus is this model, is being able to provide those services at the same time. So we can't say, well, do we need to house people or do we need to provide them, you know, these stabilization services? And you need to do it at once.
Yeah.
That if we provide one without the other, we're just kind of doing this, again, this sort of whack-a-mole.
Right.
Which
It's an and.
it's an and.
Homes
It's,
and
yes,
these services.
Which is why the transitional housing can work, because they've been stabilized. Folks are then in a safe, clean, stable housing environment while they're still, you know, getting outpatient treatment, getting some supports, having an action plan, having some accountability, but also a lot of support to take those next steps. So as a community, when we're looking at, you know, how do we do this, it's
Yeah.
ensuring access to treatment, it's making sure that housing is there, and it is, you know, meeting people where they are.
Right.
And that's a big part of our whole philosophy as well, is, and having this system of care, is meeting people where they are and helping them move to that next step that they're looking to, and that we're not saying, well, we think that's where you should go, but saying, where are you and where do you want to be and how can we be part of that?
Fabulous. Thank you, Ariel.
Yeah,
We're,
thank you.
We're
We're good on time.
We're
Okay.
grateful to have CORE, grateful to have you. So thanks, and
much.
thanks for
Yeah.
being here. And thank you for watching this segment of NCTV's series on homelessness and where do we go from here. So please stay tuned, because after the break, we're going to be right back with Lew and his guest, Pauli Halstead.
Even though we sold drugs and did bad stuff to keep a home, we're not bad people. Addictions, a disease that's really hard to deal with, and you gotta keep going. We couldn't take care of our son, we couldn't pay our bills, so it digs you a hole that it's hard to get out of, but we're not bad people.
This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here? This is the second segment on a series dealing with homelessness in Nevada County. We have with us Pauli Halstead, who is a community advocate, and Pauli and I have worked together for quite a while. Stryker House, which Pauli managed and oversaw, as well as cooked in and with. I managed to cook as well, even though that wasn't one of my great strengths.
Oh, yes, it was.
But we had a lot of fun doing it together, and we learned a whole lot.
Sure did.
So, Pauli, first, if you wouldn't mind, just to give us a little bit of background as to why you're involved in the community, what brought you here, maybe a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I moved to Nevada City in 2011, and some of the first people that I met here were Janice O'Brien, she's president of Sierra Roots, as we know, Renette Sinham, and Dee Janelli, and some of this group of people started Sierra Roots. Later on, I became vice president of Sierra Roots, and then sort of segued into being asked by Shirley Kinghorn to start a lunch program because I'm a professional chef. I was a caterer in the Napa Valley for many years, and so we started a lunch program at the First Baptist Church. But just to back up a little, A little about my personal life. My mother was a schizophrenic, so I grew up in a household. Also, my dad was an alcoholic, so I grew up in a household with that kind of a trauma, and so I've had a long kind of introspection in my life as to what causes mental illness or addiction, and also what can we do to heal ourselves. And so I think what I know now is most of the homeless that are on the street now that we came in contact with at Stryker House are victims of trauma, early childhood trauma. And this trauma doesn't go away. It is persistent and very difficult to treat. And so when we're thinking about the homeless, you hear phrases like, oh, well, they should just get a job, or, they should go to detox, or they should do this or that. It's very difficult to overcome these traumas. And if anybody has ever read the book by Gabor Mate, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, he's a Canadian psychiatrist. He has some YouTube videos and whatever. But he talks about early childhood trauma as the thing that we need to get back to. And unless these people get into that some kind of intensive treatment, they're not going to recover. And these are the people that we saw almost daily coming into Stryker House. And this was what was so tragic about this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what brought you to the point of recognizing this and moving into Stryker House?
Well, in my own recovery, because I have had to recover from a lot of trauma in my life, which resulted in a lot of depression, eating disorders, things like that. When I was living in Hood River, Oregon, I read a book called Primal Body, Primal Mind by Nora Gagaudis, and she was a neurofeedback specialist and also a nutritionist. She practiced in Portland. I became her client. She put me on the paleo diet. When I changed my diet, eating more organic, more good fats, more fruits and vegetables, I got off sugar, all these things, and also I took certain nutrients that help the brain, vitamin B6 and zinc and stuff like that. My depression left in about 3 months' time. And so I really began to realize what a change in diet and certain other healing things can do in a very short time to help the brain. So I wrote a couple of cookbooks with these recipes that would help the brain. One is Primal Cuisine, Cooking for the Paleo Diet. Anyway, so fast forward to here, I wanted to start providing really good, nutritious foods for the homeless. Like a lot of the foods that we see nonprofits serve are leftovers from the grocery store, a lot of pastries, sugar, stuff like that. And I just, that is like the wrong stuff to be feeding the people anyway. So when I started the food program with Divine Spark, and then at Stryker House, we cherry-picked the best stuff from the food bank, from Interfaith Food Ministry. Yeah. You brought all your stuff from the garden every week during the summer, as did other people. I'd come to the house and there would be a box of tomatoes or this or that. And it was like a farmer's market food, which is what I used in my catering business. And we both know how much the people coming in the door really appreciated the good food. They knew the difference, and they really knew that we were going the extra distance for them, and that they could come back for seconds, you know. And then we had a whole table full of really nutritious snacks and stuff like that. So what I'm interested in serving our homeless or trying to solve the problem is, why can't we reach into the depths of ourselves and give people the best of what we have to offer instead of the shittiest stuff, you know? It just drives me nuts. And so this is the bandwagon that I've been on. Let's do the best we can for everybody. So that's my philosophy.
Right, and of course we did that. I can remember going to the various places to pick up foods and saying no to all the sugars and yes to all the fresh veggies and you know, the organic foods. So I'm really glad to see not only our occupation with healthy foods, but the society in general is becoming better educated. So Stryker House, we found out that yes, that's a good approach. It was a day warm shelter throughout the winter, throughout the year, yet it was not sustainable.
Yes. Well, with any endeavor, it needs enough funding, and we had a very generous donor and everything, but we still needed some more money to have ongoing management, that kind of sustainability. So I'm really hoping with the next day center that's on the agenda, maybe starting on July 1st this year, with the county's assistance, that there will be that sustainability. The other thing we did, and other than the food that we served every day, is that we had the shower program. Huge.
And clothing.
And clothing. Yeah. And we had Diane Weichel. She managed the shower program and the clothing room. And we had great volunteers. I wish I could name every single one. Patty Galley was so fantastic. She runs Pets of the Homeless. But Patty Galley was on Facebook every morning. Oh, Stryker House needs this, they need that. And it would just land the next day. I mean, people brought over clothes, really good quality clothes, everything, anything we needed. Actually, the community helped, and that really contributed to, you know, the success and sustainability of it for that long.
It's a very responsive community and very generous community, and we, as long as the organizations and the institutions can sustain themselves, the community will support it and find ways to help. And one of the things that we're seeing as an example, let's shift to the cold weather shelter. And again, it's one of the areas that needs to be better defined, so that who's responsible, what facilities. Again, there are steps that need to be taken to make that sustainable, that where the community can help. But in order to do that, the cities, the county have to cooperate with one another. The organizations, the nonprofits have to work with. There's a certain amount of collaboration that has to take place, which is still in motion, hasn't quite stabilized.
Well, we sort of fell through the cracks again this winter. Last winter, as we know, Hospitality House took in quite a few extra people during the cold weather at their own expense, and that was very, very expensive for them. We had we had Salvation Army. They housed people for a while, but they had a very low temperature criteria for getting in, like 30 degrees if it's dry, or 32 degrees if it's snowing. That's way too cold. And then Sierra Roots for the last few years has operated a shelter either at Seaman's Lodge or the Vets building in Nevada City. However, during the winter, those buildings are booked for events. So what happened last year is some people were left out in the cold because those buildings were booked. So last spring I started addressing this with the city and the county, saying we have to find a dedicated building for this winter. But somehow it just got backburnered all year long. So we arrived at this winter, same problem. The buildings are booked. So here we were this weekend with both buildings booked, and people having to be out last night. It was 29 degrees in the city, in Nevada City this morning, and only 15 people can get into Hospitality House. So I don't think
15 additional people.
15 additional people per night, yeah. So at any rate, I am fairly upset that we couldn't come up with an alternative space like city council, chambers, or whatever to save lives. I mean, to me, this is what local government is for, is to watch out for everybody. And when they've been put on notice a bunch of times that we do have a problem, that they're not more proactive in coming up with a solution. I don't think they did enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're dealing with that gap. But one of the things I've noticed is that the people are acknowledging those gaps, and they are addressing them. It's not like nobody's paying attention.
Yeah.
So there is progress being made, and listening to the other people like Brendan Phillips, who was reporting recently, we are making headway, and I'm just happy to see that the county has begun to prioritize $500,000 of funding, not yet designated where it's going to go. So, I mean, all of these things are in motion, and people like yourselves and other organizations are really moving to better define a strategy that people can agree upon.
I agree. Well, we had the Homeless Processes Improvement Groups meeting all year last year, and so we did identify a lot of the gaps in services. Mostly they have to do with services that are directly related to people on the street. And so I think the county, Michael Hagerty, Heidi Hall, others who were involved in these meetings have really begun to realize that they have to really begin to address these things, that we can't wait any longer. So I was really happy to see that some funding was going to happen. Yeah.
Right.
And especially a new day center. The new day center is going to be a godsend for people.
Right.
Yeah.
They're calling it the Navigation Center because...
Oh, yeah. No, that is the perfect name.
Yeah.
I like it much better. The Navigation
Right.
Center.
Yeah,
Yes.
it doesn't sound like daycare.
Yes,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I keep calling it the
Yeah.
day center, but I like the Navigation Center.
Right.
Yeah, much better.
And the other thing I'm finding in doing these interviews is that although there's a need for the acute emergency care, there really needs housing to be addressed, affordable housing. And I wanted you to explain to people watching that what is housing first? How would you just best describe that?
Okay, I'm not the best expert on it, but this is what I do understand. Housing First is a federal program, and the goal is to get the most vulnerable part of the homeless population housed first. I think this is what they were using in Utah, and they were having success just getting people off the street and into housing. Now, with the Housing First program, the way I understand it is, first of all, most of these people are not, in my opinion, really housing ready. They haven't lived in housing for a very long time. Some of them are mentally ill. Some of them have addiction issues. And just putting them in housing isn't necessarily going to solve those problems, because remember, these people not only have childhood trauma, they've had trauma from living on the street. So they are going to need a lot of supportive care. Now, with Housing First, the supportive care is elective. They do not have to sign up for for the supportive care if they don't want to. And in some cases, they do not want to. The other thing is the supportive care, the caseworker management is only going to be available, the way I understand it, for a limited period of time, like for maybe 6 months. It used to be with a rapid rehousing program, it was 18 months, but I think that's being cut back. You can check on that with Brendan or Michael Hagerty. But at any rate, caseworker support, in my opinion, is essential for people being successful in housing. I also manage some housing. We've taken people from hospitality house through the rapid rehousing program, also some Section 8 people. And I do know that caseworker support, if it's not there or if they don't agree to it, is a recipe for failure. They really need the caseworker support, and if they have addiction issues, I think they need to be in the program. But if with Housing First, if they don't want to do that, they don't have to. So we need landlords who are willing to get on board with the Housing First program. But if the caseworker support isn't there, or the people don't want it, it puts the landlord in a position of then having to micromanage the tenants. So I've been having discussions with the county about this particular gap. Yeah, so we're still working on it, but it's an important thing. We got to get people housed. And the other thing is we have to have the housing.
Right.
So the county, really, the Board of Supervisors has to be more proactive in reducing fees for builders who want to build accessory dwelling units, low-income housing, or very low-income housing. We have to start stimulating that particular market.
And that's a good way to end our interview, in the sense of where do we go from here, the kind of recommendations you would like to see happen. And that one of them is reducing fees to encourage people to build secondary homes or developments that would better house people.
Yes, and we have to start with housing that's affordable for the poverty-stricken people. I mean, for workforce housing. In our county, we don't have housing for the workforce. So a lot of our workforce, as you know, are living in their cars.
Right.
Yeah, they came to Stryker House.
Yeah. Well, I hope you've learned more about the conditions for homelessness and all the available options. We continue to look into these issues, as well as the housing, affordable housing, which is going to be coming up soon. We'll be interviewing people to see how we can better develop housing that can be available to folks countywide. Hope you will continue to watch the shows Monday night at 7 p.m. Nevada County Television, also streamed on the internet. They will be also available on the YouTube channel. So I'm your host, Lew Sitzer. Thanks for watching.